Our next speaker is going to be Miriam. Miriam is a mother first and a survivor advocating for herself and others second, because motherhood and having her own daughters to love and protect led her down a path of healing and advocacy. She created an affirmation deck of cards that aid survivors by providing tangible healing by teaching survivors to advocate for themselves by validating their emotions. She created the Instagram account because of what happened and that community where she wants survivors to see her, a real survivor experiencing real healing with all the ups and downs. It's definitely a trip, she says. So Miriam, would you like to go ahead and get started?
Yes, I would love to. I would also love to say that if anybody is comfortable turning on their cameras, I would really benefit from seeing some faces. It's a little bit intimidating to see so many blank screens. Thank you. You guys are so sweet. Cassie, hi. I know so many people. I recognize names, so I'm very excited. Okay, I have a little prompter, so if I'm looking off to the side, it's literally keeping me going because I need the direct message for my ADHD. Okay, so I'm going to start by introducing myself a little. My name is Miriam, like Brittany said, and so I think we all have different definitions for what abuse or molestation or assault is, and I have my definition, and the words that I've chosen to use to describe for myself is a survivor of sexual assault and abuse. And in addition to that, I don't even know if I would call myself a survivor now as much as a thriver. And I've seen so many posts that outline that transition from victim to survivor and then thriver. And some even say warrior is next. And so I feel like I'm definitely like a warrior advocate. Like that's the vibe I feel like I'm entering lately with my like new phase of self-love. I also want to say that I'm not a therapist. I'm not even a certified advocate. I'm not a lawyer. I am just a survivor who advocates for my healing and others through sharing my experience. The assaults and abuse that I experienced heavily involved grooming. And just to give you a little bit of background about where my personal experience and like expertise lies. I believe when you experience something like what I did, you do gain a lot of insight and knowledge from just being there. And I have a lot of firsthand knowledge from being groomed and abused for so many years and by multiple abusers. So my story as a survivor kind of starts in 2015. This was a little bit over 2 years after the abuse stopped for me, and I had just given birth to my daughter, and I suddenly realized and began to understand what happened to me, as so many victims do as they experience like those big life events. And after I realized what happened, I went and reported it to the police, and this was just 5 days after my oldest daughter was born. And I will never forget squeezing my bleeding, bloated body into a pair of skinny jeans that were way too small and taking myself and my 5-pound newborn daughter down to the local crisis center to report the events that I 100% thought were my fault. And for the next 2 years after that, I kind of went into survival mode, entirely went into survival mode. And I didn't call myself a victim for a long time. I didn't really call myself anything. I didn't really do anything. I essentially dissociated for the first 2.5 years of my daughter's life. So I don't remember a lot from that time. I do remember meeting with lawyers and prosecutors and detectives and testifying in court for one of those cases. And the rest is fuzzy. But then a little bit over 3 years after my daughter was born, I felt the need to do something more for my healing. And I created this deck of affirmation cards, which is, I made them for myself initially to aid in my healing. And I based the deck on phrases that had brought me comfort when I needed it. The affirmations helped me so much. And I knew that other survivors needed them too. And they would help so many. feel validated and supported just as I needed to be. And so I created the deck, I had it printed, and I started selling them. And so the title of the deck is Because of What Happened, Affirmations for Survivors of Sexual Assault, Abuse, or Trauma. And once I created the deck, I created a space on Instagram where like a freaking whole community of survivors have formed. And it's just like amazing. I love it so much. It's amazing to see everybody supporting each other and sharing their experience. So I started using the affirmation cards then to uplift myself and those survivors. And that is really when I started to embrace my own healing and being a survivor and what that meant for me. So I'm going to talk a little bit more later about why I think starting this community helped me get to the point where I am. And frankly, the point where I am now is like a badass mom and survivor and advocate. And I feel like I've totally changed the definition for myself more and so many other survivors of what healing looks like. I'm a survivor who is trying to take my truest self as I'm experiencing my healing and as I'm experiencing the lawsuits and as I'm experiencing everything that goes with reporting and healing. And while not every survivor's story and healing is like mine, I am sharing mine and encouraging other survivors to work towards healing, to validate and advocate for themselves too. Healing is so hard. There are so many downs, but there are also a lot of ups in life as we are experiencing those downs. And I want to represent both sides of that. So because of what happened is the way that I do that, the community. And what I share is really a long-term and in real-time way of reframing those negative thoughts and statements that myself and others, survivors experience every day. I'm acknowledging, feeling, and reframing when it's needed, those thoughts to aid in the healing and thriving after what happened. One way I do that is with the affirmation cards in my stories, where I take those thoughts that the members of the community have shared with me anonymously and then reframe and validate them with a grouping of affirmation cards from the deck. So for example, let's see, what's an example? Someone should comment a negative thought in the chat that they have about what happened to them if they're a survivor, if anyone wants to, or I can just do one of mine. I could have done more. So I would take the affirmation cards and they're all as if you're saying them to yourself. Let's see, I can't change what happened. I'm growing and changing every day. And I didn't deserve what happened. I feel like that really applies to I could have prevented it. So I take the cards like that in my Instagram stories every Thursday and take those anonymous things that people send me. And it's kind of new and I really like doing it and I'm going to keep doing it because I love it. So the way that I feel that my page is successful, my Instagram and the community is successful in helping survivors and helping myself is just showing examples of what life is like and how what I feel may apply to other survivors' lives. And if I do share what's going on for me, how it's affecting me, realistically and honestly, and even if it's uncomfortable, then survivors can see parts of my journey and my experience, and that may validate something that they have also experienced and that they can take what they need to from what I share and apply some of those things to their lives or not if it doesn't resonate with them. So after what happened, I've chosen to take things that I don't think I can say, or I don't think I'm allowed to say, or I don't think I should say because it's too personal, or it may make people uncomfortable. And, or whatever the case is, whatever reason I have for not saying those things. And I make the decision, the conscious decision to say those things anyway, because I feel like it bridges the gap between survivors. And in the last 6 years after reporting what happened, I have had horrible thoughts. And I'm sure some of you guys know what I'm talking about. Like thoughts that I would never want anybody else to hear or know that I think. And I have felt so alone and disconnected because of the idea that my thoughts and my emotions from my experience have only been felt by me, which of course they haven't. Not that I'm experiencing self-pity, but instead that I feel alone because I have been too ashamed to talk to other survivors about what I went through. So I'm unable to hear all of those echoes and me toos from others because I'm too scared to say anything first. And I think that's the case for a lot of survivors. But I'm not being groomed anymore, and I'm not being made to keep silent anymore. And I don't carry the shame from what happened anymore. That didn't let me speak for so long. And that is just so mind-blowing for me. For so long, I just felt like I couldn't say anything. And my lawsuit with one of the people who assaulted me has been pushed back so many years. And with COVID, again, 6 months, 6 months, 6 months, and now it's in June. And I was talking to my mom and I was like, I'm just so mad. I'm so tired. I don't want to do it anymore. Like, but I've been going this long. And then last week I was like, if I had gone to trial 4 years ago or 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago, I would not be able to stand in front of a jury and a judge and lawyers and the person who abused me and be able to speak so clearly without that shame. And so I just really enjoy that acceptance of timing that I'm experiencing right now. So what happened affects me in very personal ways, but what I found is that when I actually share those things that are personal and scary, like sometimes these are ones I shared on Instagram. Sometimes I remember abuse while having consensual sex, or I told the person who abused me that I loved them. And these are all things that I've said specifically about my experience. Or I don't forgive the person who abused me and I don't have to. Or on the flip side, it's okay if I do forgive the person who abused or assaulted me. And when I can push through the shame that wants to keep me quiet and say those things, I can see it bridging the gap between survivors. And when I free those thoughts, I feel that myself and other survivors suddenly are freed from that solitude of our thoughts that make us feel so ashamed and embarrassed and scared, or whatever other emotions everyone's experiencing. So part of the reason I get so many questions of people asking, like, how am I able to speak so confidently? And I feel like part of the reason is because I believe that I really do believe that sharing my experience is going to be able to comfort other survivors. And I can just feel and see and like it's so real for me how much it's helped me. And so I know it can help others too. Especially, this is like one of my favorite things that I ever say. I've used it before, especially that survivor who's sitting awake at 2 a.m. having a nocturnal panic attack, thinking they're alone and that this is just how the rest of their life is going to be. I can speak so confidently because I know sharing my experience can help that survivor know that they are not alone. There are other survivors going through the exact same thing, almost. They're all, in the same realm with them. And it does suck, but we're not alone. Even in the middle of the night, I can almost guarantee there's another survivor having that same nocturnal panic attack, like thinking they're just going to die. I like make the jokes about the nocturnal panic attacks, but I know it's bad, you guys. I know it's bad, but it's easy to make light of it to try to make myself feel a little bit better. One of my favorite things is that I am having less panic attacks at night lately, so those do get better. So I think one of the most powerful tools that we have as survivors and as advocates and therapists and lawyers who defend survivors is that solidarity that survivors can experience. And solidarity is born from validation. I'm going to put that on a t-shirt. I wrote that last night and I was just like, that's it, guys. The idea that you are not alone, that whatever you're experiencing is valid, that affirmation that your emotions, whether the person supporting you has experienced them or not, matters. There are several ways that people, when we open up to them about our experiences, can respond. Many of those ways being negative, And I know, I'm sure so many of us know what those are. And I believe that there is value in mentioning those negative responses so that we can avoid them when advocating. And we can also help others, through example. So author Aphrodite Matsakis outlines a few of the ways in the book Trust After Trauma. And we did read that book in the book club last year for anybody who's there. So some of the responses she mentions are pretty obvious to avoid, like denial and disbelief, where the response you give essentially says that they are lying or exaggerating, or it couldn't be true because, they're, we know. Another is discounting. She says, quote, with denial, people do not believe your story. When you are being discounted, people do not deny that the traumatic event occurred. However, they minimize its effect on you or the magnitude of its effects, end quote. And sometimes this is like obviously minimizing, and other times it can be phrases like, well, at least you're alive, or comparing it to someone else's experience and saying what happened to you wasn't as bad as what happened to them, or even the infamous, well, the sun's still shining, you have so much to be happy about, to be focusing on this for the rest of your life. Another listed in the book is in Trust After Trauma is blaming the victim, which we can all probably identify as phrases like, you shouldn't have been drinking so much, what were you wearing, and the particularly ignorant, you deserved it or you were asking for it. Which, you guys, I don't really hear that one a lot unless it's from like my TikTok followers. Not my TikTok followers, but people on TikTok, So and in the book, she also touches on why people have those responses, and that's a very powerful thing to read and understand. And it just doesn't affect me as much now that I have read that information and understand why people say those things. So the next response listed in the book is ignorance. She says, quote, if people have not experienced trauma themselves or have not learned about it in other ways, they often don't know how to respond or what to say to a trauma survivor. And the fact that you were victimized may threaten other people's belief in just world philosophy and their defenses against the idea that they could also be victimized, end quote. I love that one because that brought me so much comfort, because that applies to people who have never been victimized, which I think that's a lower number than we think it is, because it's just so scary, the idea, like they just can't fathom it. It just couldn't happen. They've never seen that. And then with people who have experienced it but haven't started processing it, maybe don't remember or just have negative experiences with other people, it's that same thing. They just they do that victim blaming because of those reasons and not because of anything to do with you. So the next one that she mentions is generalizing your experience. No one likes to be misunderstood. No one likes to be placed into a box that people think they understand you when they really don't know how the trauma is affecting you personally, because they're not you. The last one is cruelty. She says, quote, almost all of these wounding responses feel cruel. Therefore, it is frequently difficult to determine whether the pain that the person is causing is the result of ignorance, generalization, or the need to blame the victim to avoid facing their own sympathetic anguish, end quote. One of the hardest things I feel like after this kind of trauma is the feeling of not being supported. And it's easy to let our emotions spiral when it comes to not being supported. So I do believe that one of the best ways that we can advocate for ourselves and validate our own emotions is to surround ourselves with other survivors. We have reached a point in time where that has become relatively easy, because you can just get on Instagram or TikTok or wherever and find people and accounts and organizations where we can immerse ourselves in communities where people are using validating language. And that is exactly what we need to hear and exactly what we need to be doing to move forward. And it's just so accessible. And I try to stay away from the word positive whenever I'm talking about communities, because I don't know that we want positive necessarily communities, because when I'm talking about affirmations, and that is the main center of everything I do is affirmations. And I don't ever say positive affirmations because you're not necessarily trying to only affirm and validate those positive emotions, but you're also trying to validate those negative emotions that pop up that you don't feel like you're supposed to talk about, or you don't feel like you're supposed to have at all, because we do all have them. And as a survivor, I feel that it's very important for me in my space to represent those negative emotions and experiences as well, because I feel like that genuine aspect of healing is so needed. None of us want that like toxic positivity crap. We know it sucks and we don't need to pretend it doesn't. But we also know there is healing, you know? So I think we all know that the ideal thing would be that people never get abused or assaulted or raped. And I loved what Jenna said. And I love that there are tools that we can use to make that a reality. And we all know, like you're saying, so who was it that said, I think Anna maybe, or someone else, someone asked like about setting those boundaries with your family, with your children. It's so hard for us to make those first steps. And it feels like it will be generations before it's so, I'm being so negative, but I feel like we all know the realities, you know, of what's going on here. We all know it's not just going to magically go away. But it would be magical, and it would be 100% the best thing if people just didn't rape and abuse and molest people. You know, that's the ideal thing. Okay, so that's number one. That's the goal. So we know that's not a reality. Kind of been proven that it's not yet. So maybe the next best thing would be when it does happen, that survivors would feel like they can go and report it to whoever it needs to be reported to, and that the case would be handled perfectly and fairly, and victims could receive justice and healing. And if justice is being served, then hopefully that type of crime would decrease and less people would be experiencing those kinds of traumas, because just as Jenna said, the people who are committing those crimes would be held accountable and taken out of polite society. But it sucks because we don't get any of that. And I think if you guys, I mean, I feel like most of us are survivors here. I think there's a lot of advocates and a lot of educators here too. But I've had two experiences with law enforcement and with my cases being handled as far as receiving justice goes. One of them got wrapped up pretty quickly, and the person served some jail time, you know how that goes. And the other one, the prosecutor was just like, I don't know, seems like you wanted it. Doesn't call me back for 5 years. I call her back. She's like, no, really. And I'm like, all right, girl, I'm not a lawyer. I'm going to explain to you why this was not consensual. And then she's like, okay, I'll call you back. It's been 6 months. So I'm thinking we're, you know, so we've seen both sides, and also with the detectives and how that goes. And so right now, I, from firsthand experience, do know that it is not realistic to say that the best thing for people to do right now is to report, because it is not always safe and is not always effective. And sometimes it does more harm than good. And sometimes it really is just as bad as not doing anything at all, because of how re-traumatizing it most often is, and with no results for so many. And I really do wish it was different, but it's not. And I truly believe that the first steps to healing this incredibly broken system really is survivor validation right now. And because when we validate survivors and we allow them to feel that they can be open about what happened to them, and if survivors feel like they can be open about what happened to them and they're going to be trusted and supported, and then hopefully they feel like they can report. And when survivors feel like they can report, prosecutors and lawyers will have more experience and more opportunities and more pressure to try cases and get the experience that they need dealing with that kind of crime, and realizing how widespread the epidemic of rape is, and hopefully take it seriously and work to create a better world. This sentiment is oozing with optimism, and it is too far off to even imagine it without feeling a little silly. But I truly feel that validating survivors right now is the purest and best first step, even if right now it is the whole process. It is the only step, is validating survivors, because the people who are doing this work are survivors trying to heal. Sometimes I can't even wake up and change my underwear, you know? And now not only do I have to do that, but I'm also like playing lawyer with the prosecutor. No, it's not going to work. And so we need more people on our side, and we need more people learning to use that validating language. And the way that we can do that is leading by example as survivors and surrounding ourselves with other survivors who are using that validating and healing language. Whew. Gotta take a deep breath, you guys. So I do feel like if you guys are here and you're listening to the words I'm saying, then we are those people who are passionate about healing survivors and the world. And you are those people, whether or not you guys have certificates or degrees. And if you're here seeking higher healing and higher advocacy and higher solidarity within the survivor community, and just by being here, we're already one step ahead of everybody else. And we, all of us here, are going to be able to make such a difference just because of that. Once I was in a women's circle, and how am I doing on time, Brittany? Give me a thumbs down if I need to like speed it up. But we were doing healing on our spirits, and I brought up what happened to me. And one of the women who responded said, yeah, well, we've all been through something. And she just like brushed it off. And I know that, you guys, I know that everybody's been through something, and everyone's been through different things. It's not all rape, and it's not all assault, and it's not all abuse. And we're all going through hard things. But when she said that, it was very invalidating. And my response to that is, yes, we have all been through something. And maybe she had even been through the same thing. And, but I'm going to keep bringing this up, and I'm going to continue bringing this up because I didn't just go through something, and I'm not just trying to move on from it, which is okay for some people who want to do that. But my path is not to just move on from this. My current path is to take what happened to me and make the world better, because it's personal to me. And it's personal to me because not only do I know how this is affecting my life, I know it's affecting my brothers and my sisters, and it's affecting my cousins' lives, and it's affecting so many others in my DMs, and it's affecting so many of us here because we wouldn't be here if it wasn't. And it's affecting my 5-year-old daughter, and it's affecting my 2-year-old daughter. Not that anything has happened to them yet, but that they live in a world where nothing is being done about this kind of thing. And I don't want it to affect them the way that it's affecting me. And I don't want them to go through what I went through. And so I am going to continue talking about it. And one of my favorite affirmations is, I know when it's appropriate to talk about what happened. And I added that affirmation to the deck because I felt like there were so many times where I didn't feel like I could say, like when someone asked me, how are you? How I was really doing. And it's gotten to a point where like I just say it because I know when it's appropriate. I'm not gonna like go up to like my next door neighbor who's like a 65-year-old male, and he asked me how I'm doing, and I'm like, not good. Had 3 nightmares last night that I was being raped. Like, I know I'm not gonna do that, but I do feel safe being honest with people about my situation when I need to, without compromising anything that's going to, without compromising my own healing. Okay, let's try to get back on track. So I know that I feel called to make a difference in this area. And I feel like if anybody feels called to make the future brighter in any way, even if it's something simple, maybe it's creating a product or speaking or writing a book, or maybe you feel called to do something and you feel called to share your story, you deserve to know that whatever it is that you feel called to do is going to make a difference. And the most important thing that you need to do before you validate anybody else or simultaneously, while you're validating others, is to validate yourself. Those responses that we talked about earlier, it's horrifying that other people say those things, but freaking stop saying it to yourself, you guys. Like, ew, don't do it anymore. You don't deserve it. Providing that solidarity for yourself is going to be so amazing, because loving yourself can enable you to give so much more. Doing that healing for yourself will enable you to do so much more because of what happened, and starting this community and starting to make the affirmation cards, and for other survivors, opened a door for me into my own healing that I was not aware of. And I don't have to be perfectly healed to help others. I'm not offering anybody advice. I'm just sharing my own experience. And an important part of doing that and creating that space is making sure that I am doing regular check-ins with myself and setting boundaries for my community and myself, and providing a safe place for not only people who are a part of the community, but also for me to feel like I can continue doing that advocating and healing for myself. Those two things just go so hand in hand. And they need to, for you to be successful and to continue affirming and validating and working to heal. And anyone who is able to do their own healing because of what I'm sharing is just like so amazing in my mind. So every time any of us we share a story or make a post on Instagram or validate a survivor as they share their story, we're creating a foundation that is going to be strong enough for ourselves and others to continue standing on as we continue working to get to that ultimate optimistic and magical goal where no one is being abused or assaulted or raped.
Miriam.
That's kind of it. If anybody has any questions.
Yes, I was just going to say we should probably start taking questions. And I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the chat, but there are some good comments while you're speaking as well.
Oh, you guys are awesome. Thank you.
You all can start raising your hands if you have questions for Miriam. Miriam, one question I have for you is you mentioned that book. I would love if you have like a list of books that are great for survivors. I would love to hear about those, or maybe you could just drop some suggestions in the chat. That would be great too.
Yeah, I can do that. I think the books that I would suggest are definitely a lot of them are about educating about like trauma and abuse and that kind of thing, but a lot of them really are just good for that like survivor's perspective. But anybody can ask anything, honestly. I love getting into it.
I'll turn off the recording so everyone can feel comfortable.